In 43 years on this bench, I have seen almost everything. I have seen people cry. I have seen people lie straight to my face with a smile. I have seen people walk into my courtroom with nothing but the clothes on their back and more dignity than most millionaires will ever carry in their entire lifetime. But every now and then, a case walks through that door that stops me cold. A case that makes me sit back in my chair and ask myself one simple question. What is justice really for? If you believe that justice should be about people, not paperwork, then you are exactly where you need to be right now. Do me a favor before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button, because the story I'm about to tell you is one of the most powerful things I have ever witnessed in a courtroom, and you are not going to want to miss a single word. It was a Tuesday morning in Providence, Rhode Island, March 14th, 2023. The kind of cold that gets into your bones before you even open your front door. My courtroom opens at 8 in the morning, but people start lining up outside at 7. That is just the reality of this work. People have problems that cannot wait. People have situations that do not sleep in on Tuesday mornings. And on this particular Tuesday, one of those people was a 58-year-old man named Thomas Rivera. Most people in that waiting area knew Thomas. They called him Tommy. He had lived in the same neighborhood in South Providence for over 30 years. He was the kind of man who shoveled his neighbor's driveway before he did his own. The kind of man who showed up at your door with soup when you were sick and never mentioned it again afterward. I did not know any of this yet when I first saw his name on the docket that morning. I just saw a case number 23MC0447, violation of Rhode Island general laws, section 31 to 11 to 18. Operating a motor vehicle with a suspended license, a misdemeanor, a routine case. At least, that is what I thought. Tommy walked into my courtroom at 9:47 in the morning. He was wearing a gray jacket that was at least 10 years old, maybe older. His shoes were clean but worn at the heels. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, the kind of build that told you he had worked hard his whole life, but he walked slowly, carefully, like a man who had to think about each step before he took it. He had a clear plastic bag with him that held some papers and a small orange prescription bottle. He sat down in the front row and folded his hands in his lap and waited. He did not look nervous exactly. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. Then the other person walked in, and I want you to picture this clearly because it matters. Bradley Whitmore III was 34 years old. He worked as an assistant district attorney for Providence County. His father, Bradley Whitmore Jr., was one of the most connected attorneys in the state of Rhode Island. Bradley III had gone to Harvard for undergrad and Harvard Law after that. He had never struggled a day in his life. You could see it in the way he walked. You could hear it in the way he talked. He wore a Brioni suit that morning. I know what a Brioni suit looks like because my son pointed one out to me once in a magazine. They start at $3,000. His watch was a Rolex Submariner in stainless steel and gold. His shoes were Bottega Veneta. He carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Tommy Rivera's monthly disability check. Bradley Whitmore III walked into my courtroom like he owned the building. And the way he looked at Tommy when he sat down across from him told me everything I needed to know about what kind of morning this was going to be. I called the case and asked Tommy to stand. He stood up slowly, both hands pressing down on the bench in front of him to push himself up. I noticed that. I notice everything. I said, Mr. Rivera, this citation says you were stopped on March 14th at approximately 6:12 in the morning on Interstate 95 southbound near exit 15. Officer Deshaun Morris, badge number 4417, ran your license and found it suspended due to unpaid fines totaling $460. Is that accurate? Tommy looked at me and said, Yes, Your Honor, that is accurate. I said, Can you tell me where you were going at 6:12 in the morning? He said, I was going to dialysis, Your Honor, at Providence Kidney Care Center on Eddy Street. I go every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 6:45 a.m. If I miss a treatment, my kidneys cannot do their job. The doctors told me if I missed too many, I could go into a coma. The courtroom got quiet. Not completely quiet, because courtrooms are never completely quiet, but the kind of quiet where everyone stops shuffling papers for a moment. I asked him why he was driving instead of taking a ride service or calling someone. He said, "My wife Rosa, she works the overnight shift at Rhode Island Hospital. She is an aide on the cardiac floor. She gets off at 7, but sometimes not until 7:30. My own car, a 2009 Honda Civic, the alternator went out on Saturday. I borrowed my neighbor Mr. Carvalho's car. Mr. Carvalho said it was okay. I only needed it for 40 minutes round trip. I did not think I would get stopped. I know I should not have done it. I take full responsibility." And then Bradley Whitmore III cleared his throat. He said, "Your Honor, with respect, the defendant has just admitted to knowingly operating a motor vehicle with a suspended license. The law does not contain a medical exemption clause. The defendant was aware his license was suspended. He made a choice. The state is requesting the maximum allowable fine of $1,000 and a mandatory 6-month extension of the license suspension." I looked at Bradley for a long moment. I said, "Counselor, let me ask you something. Have you read the full background on this defendant?" He said, "I have reviewed the relevant documentation, Your Honor. The violation is clear." I said, "Sit down." He sat. I looked back at Tommy and I asked him to tell me more about his situation. Not just the driving, but how he got here. Because I believe that you cannot understand what a person did without first understanding what a person has been through. Tommy sat back down and he told me his story. He had served 22 years in the United States Army. He was a staff sergeant in the infantry. He did 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He came home in 2009 with a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart from an IED explosion outside of Fallujah that took 2 fingers from his left hand and a body that was slowly breaking down. For years after he got home, he worked at a metal fabrication plant in Cranston. He worked there for 9 years. In 2020, the plant closed. 1,500 people lost their jobs overnight. Tommy lost his. He was 55 years old and had a kidney disease that had been quietly getting worse since his late 40s. Without the insurance from the job, his medical bills piled up fast. He fell behind on everything. Car insurance payments, utility bills, a parking ticket from 2 years ago that turned into 3, that turned into court fees, that turned into suspended license flags in the DMV system. He said, "I am not a bad person, Your Honor. I have never been in trouble in my life. I just could not keep up with everything all at once." I believed him. "I have been doing this for a long time. I know when a person is performing and I know when a person is just telling the truth." Tommy Rivera was telling the truth, and this is exactly the moment when I need you to stay with me, because what happened next is the part of this story that made my blood run hot. If you have ever watched someone get kicked when they are already down and felt that fire start in your chest, then you know exactly how I felt when Bradley Whitmore III stood up again and opened his briefcase. He said, "Your Honor, I want to enter additional documentation into the record. I have here a printout of the defendant's full violation history. In addition to the current suspended license charge, Mr. Rivera has 2 prior citations, one for an expired registration in 2019 and one for a broken tail light in 2021. I would argue this demonstrates a pattern of disregard for traffic law, and frankly, if the court is considering leniency simply because the defendant claims to be sick, I would note that the court cannot verify that claim without documentation." He said the word claims, like Tommy was making it up, like a 58-year-old man with a dialysis appointment at 6:45 in the morning was some kind of con artist. The room reacted. I heard a woman behind me draw in a sharp breath. I heard someone in the gallery say something under their breath. I gave that person a look and the room went quiet again. I said, "Mr. Whitmore, are you suggesting that this man fabricated a kidney disease to avoid a traffic fine?" He said, "I am suggesting, Your Honor, that the court should apply the law equally regardless of personal circumstances. That is all." I said, "I have been applying the law in this city for 43 years, Counselor. I do not need a lesson in equal application." He smiled. And that smile, I will tell you, that smile told me everything about who Bradley Whitmore III was. It was the smile of a man who has never been told no in any room that mattered to him. The smile of someone who has always been able to buy his way to the front of the line and genuinely cannot understand why anyone else is still standing in it. I told him I wanted documentation from Tommy's doctor, and I called a 15-minute recess. Now, before I tell you what happened during that recess and what came to light that changed this entire case, I want to issue you a challenge. If you are still here watching, If you care about what happens to good people in bad situations, then prove it. Go ahead and like this video right now. I dare you. Because what I am about to show you next is going to make you angrier than anything I have said so far. Can you handle it? Let's find out. During the recess, my clerk, a sharp young woman named Patricia Souza, who has worked with me for 11 years, came to me with something on her tablet. She said, "Judge Caprio, you need to see this." She turned the tablet toward me. It was a screenshot from Instagram. The account name was Bradford W3. The account was public. There were photos of a Ferrari SF90 in front of a restaurant in Newport. There were photos of a yacht called Lady Justice, and I want you to sit with that irony for a moment. There were photos of ski trips to Vail and dinners at restaurants I could not afford on a judge's salary. And then there was a specific post from January 9th of this year, exactly 63 days before Tommy Rivera's case appeared on my docket. It was a short video clip, the kind they call a reel. In it, Bradley Whitmore III was sitting behind the wheel of that same Ferrari. The caption read, "Took the prancing horse out, even though I probably shouldn't have. Wink face emoji, tagged to a Providence restaurant." The comments were full of his friends laughing. One comment said, "What about that little suspension situation?" And Bradley had replied with 3 laughing emojis. Patricia had also done some additional research. She had pulled Bradley's own DMV record. On November 22nd of the previous year, Bradley Whitmore III had received a DUI charge in Newport County. His license had been technically suspended for a period of 30 days, beginning December 15th. His father's law firm had gotten the DUI charge reduced to reckless driving, but the suspension had still been active on January 9th when that Ferrari video was posted. Active. Just like Tommy Rivera's suspension was active on March 14th. I sat with that for a moment. I let it settle. But Patricia was not finished. She said, "There is something else." She handed me a second document. It was a summary of a formal complaint filed with the Rhode Island Office of Attorney Ethics in February of that year. The complaint, filed by a defense attorney named Robert Garabedian, who had practiced in Providence for 25 years, alleged that Bradley Whitmore III had engaged in a pattern of selective prosecution. Specifically, the complaint cited 17 cases over a 2-year period where defendants from wealthy families with connections had received dramatically reduced charges or outright dismissals, while defendants without resources faced maximum prosecution. The complaint referenced specific case numbers. It was not a vague accusation. It was documented, detailed, and it had been sitting in a file somewhere while Tommy Rivera stood in my courtroom being called a liar about his kidneys. I walked back into my courtroom. And I want to tell you something. I am not a dramatic person by nature. My father, God rest his soul, was a tailor in Providence's Federal Hill neighborhood. He made suits for working men. He did not have Harvard money. He had hard-working hands and an honest reputation, and that was everything to him. He used to say to me, "Frank, a man who looks down on another man is only showing you how tall he thinks he is. He is not showing you how tall he actually is." My father was a wise man. I thought about him when I walked back through that courtroom door. I sat down, I looked at Bradley Whitmore III, and then I said to him, "Counselor, before we continue, I have a few questions for you, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer them, because we are on the record and everything said in this room matters." He straightened his Rolex on his wrist and smiled again. He said, "Of course, Your Honor." I said, "Do you have a social media account under the name Bradford W3 on Instagram?" The smile did not move exactly, but something behind it did. He said, "I believe I do, yes." I said, "On January 9th of this year, did you post a video of yourself in a motor vehicle?" He said, "I post a lot of content, Your Honor." I said, "Let me be more specific. Were you aware that your driver's license was under a 30-day suspension beginning December 15th of last year as a result of a DUI charge that was later reduced?" The room went dead silent. Bradley looked at his briefcase for 1 second. It was just 1 second, but I caught it. And then he said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, my personal driving record is not the subject of these proceedings." I said, "You are absolutely right. Your personal driving record is not the subject of these proceedings. but your credibility as a representative of the state of Rhode Island absolutely is. And you just stood in my courtroom and argued that this man should receive maximum punishment for a suspended license violation while you yourself drove on a suspended license and posted it on the internet with a winking emoji. He said, Your Honor, those are very different situations. I said, Are they? He said, My situation was resolved through proper legal channels. My father's firm handled it appropriately. And there it was. That is the sentence I want you to remember. My father's firm handled it appropriately, like it was nothing, like having a prominent lawyer father was just a normal resource that every 58-year-old dialysis patient fighting kidney failure on a veteran's disability check is supposed to have access to. I said, Let me ask you one more thing, Mr. Whitmore. When Mr. Rivera's license was suspended due to unpaid fines, did your office or the state of Rhode Island make any contact with him about a payment plan? Any outreach about hardship exemptions? Any notification about the suspension before it happened that he could have acted on? He said, That is not the function of this office. I said, No, it is not. But sending a man to maximum penalties for driving to a medical appointment in the dark at 6 a.m. is apparently exactly the function of this office. That is when I noticed the courtroom door open at the back. Now here is where I need you to pay attention because this is the moment everything changed. If you have been watching this long, you are part of a community of people who believe that justice should mean something. So I want you to take 1 second, drop a comment below this video, and tell me what you would have done in my seat right now, because what walked through that door next is something I was not expecting. And I promise you, the people in that courtroom were not expecting it either. We are in this together, so tell me your thoughts right now. A woman walked in. She was about 50, slim, gray blazer, dark hair pulled back. She carried a folder and a government ID badge that she held up briefly to my bailiff, Officer Raymond Deschamps. She walked to the front of the courtroom and said quietly, Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My name is Margaret Chen. I am with the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Rhode Island. I have a matter that intersects with these proceedings that I believe you need to be aware of. I said, Proceed. She opened her folder. She said, For the past 4 months, the U.S. Attorney's Office has been conducting an investigation into the Providence County District Attorney's Office regarding potential violations of equal protection under federal civil rights statutes. Specifically, we have been examining a pattern of prosecutorial decision-making in which defendants with financial means and legal representation receive dramatically different treatment from defendants without those resources. We have reviewed 41 cases over a 26-month period. The name Bradley Whitmore III appears as the prosecuting attorney in 29 of those cases, and we have sufficient documentation to move forward with a formal federal inquiry. She placed a copy of the filing document on my clerk's desk. Bradley Whitmore III sat very still. The Rolex did not move. The Brioni suit did not move, but his face changed. The color drained out of it like water out of a bathtub. And then he did something I genuinely did not expect. He looked at me and he said, Your Honor, I went to Harvard. I have been practicing law for 9 years. I am not going to sit here and be lectured by a municipal court judge about how the law works. That sentence landed in the room like a stone in still water, rings spreading out in every direction. I heard the reaction from the gallery. I heard Officer Deschamps shift his weight. I heard Patricia stop typing. I let the silence hold for a moment. My father always said that silence, used correctly, is the most powerful thing in any conversation, so I let it sit. And then I said this. I said, Mr. Whitmore, I went to Providence College on a scholarship because my father could not afford anything else. I have been sitting in this chair for 43 years. I have sentenced people who deserved it and helped people who needed it. And I have never, not once, needed a Harvard degree or a father's law firm to tell the difference between the two. I know exactly how the law works. What I am less sure about, based on everything I have seen this morning, is whether you do. I turned to Tommy Rivera. Tommy was sitting very still, his hands folded, watching everything unfold around him like a man who was used to the world, deciding his fate without consulting him. His eyes were calm and patient. 22 years of military service will do that to a man. You learn to wait. You learn that panic is a luxury you cannot always afford. I said, "Mr. Rivera, please stand." He stood slowly, both hands on the bench again. I said, "I have listened carefully to everything this morning. I have reviewed the documentation that your doctor's office faxed to my clerk 17 minutes ago. Your diagnosis of stage 4 chronic kidney disease is confirmed. Your treatment schedule is confirmed. The fact that you drove 4 miles to a medical appointment in the dark at 6 in the morning because your car broke down and your wife was working a night shift to keep your family's lights on is confirmed. The fact that you have spent 22 years serving this country and that a factory closing robbed you of your livelihood and set off a chain of financial hardships that led to this suspended license is confirmed." I said, "The fine that caused your suspension was $460. The state of Rhode Island sent you a notice to a previous address, and when you did not respond, they suspended your license. Nobody called. Nobody offered a payment plan. Nobody looked at your file and said, 'Hey, this is a veteran on dialysis who just lost his job. Maybe we should pick up the phone.' They just suspended the license and waited for you to get caught. The courtroom was completely still." I said, "Here is what I am going to do today. I am dismissing the charge against you. All charges. Dismissed with prejudice. You will not pay a fine. You will not receive any extension of your suspension. Furthermore, I am directing my office to contact the Rhode Island DMV Hardship Exemption Division on your behalf and to file the necessary paperwork to restore your driving privileges on a restricted basis so that you can travel to and from your medical appointments without risking arrest. I am also directing that the original $460 fine be referred to the state's Veteran Hardship Relief Fund for review and potential waiver." Tommy Rivera blinked, just once, and then he said, "Thank you, Your Honor." His voice was steady. It was not the voice of a man performing gratitude. It was the voice of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down. I said, "You do not need to thank me. You have already given this country more than this courtroom will ever be able to give back to you." I turned back to Bradley Whitmore III. I said, "As for you, Mr. Whitmore, you came into my courtroom this morning to prosecute a sick veteran for driving to a medical appointment. While doing so, you attempted to impugn his credibility, dismiss his medical condition, and invoke the maximum possible penalty. You did this while you yourself had driven on a suspended license and posted it online for your friends to laugh about, and you had the arrogance to stand in front of me and suggest that his situation and yours were different because your father's firm handled it. I am referring your conduct this morning to the Rhode Island Office of Attorney Ethics for formal review. I am also making a formal notation in today's court record that this case be made available to the U.S. Attorney's Office as additional documentation for their ongoing inquiry. You are excused from these proceedings." Bradley stood. He picked up his briefcase. He walked toward the door, and right before he pushed through it, he turned and looked at me one more time. I held his gaze. He looked away first. The door closed behind him, and that, right there, was the only justice that mattered to Bradley Whitmore III. Not a sentence from a book, not a number from a fine schedule, just a moment where someone looked him in the eye and did not look away. Sometimes that is all accountability looks like. Simple, quiet, undeniable. If you are still watching right now, then I want you to know something. The people in this community, the people who click on videos about real justice and real people and stay until the very end, you are the reason stories like Tommy's get told. So thank you for being here, and if this story moved you even a little, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today, because next time I have a case that will make your jaw drop so far it does not come back up. You think today was something, just wait. But I want to close with this, and I want you to hear me clearly. There is a version of justice that is just about the law, rules on paper, fine amounts and violation codes and case numbers. That version of justice is necessary. I believe in it. I have upheld it for 43 years. But there is another version, a deeper version, the one my father understood when he was pressing seams on the suits of working men who would never be able to afford a Brioni. The version that says that the law is supposed to serve people, not the other way around. Tommy Rivera did not wake up on March 14th looking to break the law. He woke up before the sun came up in a cold Providence winter because his kidneys cannot clean his own blood without a machine. He got into a borrowed car and drove 4 miles in the dark because the alternative was a coma. He was not a criminal that morning. He was a father and a husband and a veteran and a sick man trying to stay alive so he could go home to his wife when she got off her night shift. When the law loses sight of that, when the law becomes a tool for people like Bradley Whitmore III to exercise power over people like Tommy Rivera, it stops being justice. It becomes something else, something colder. And I have never been willing to allow that in my courtroom. I have said many times over the years that I want to be remembered as a judge who was fair to the rich and to the poor alike. Not soft, not naive, but fair, because fairness is not the same as sameness. Treating Tommy Rivera exactly like Bradley Whitmore III would not be fair. It would be willful blindness. Real fairness looks at the whole picture. It asks why. It considers what a person has been through before it decides what a person deserves. That is what justice is for, and that is what I showed up for on the morning of March 14, 2023, when a tired man in a worn-out jacket walked into my courtroom holding a prescription bottle and told me the truth.